Now, if you're like me, you probably have an IT file server somewhere, and on that you have an IT file share, and in a subfolder of that share, you probably also have a drivers folder. Right, in that drivers folder are all the different drivers for the laptops and the desktops and their NICs and their video cards and all those things that are necessary to turn a regular machine into one the user would want to use. Well, having this WDS infrastructure is great, but if I can't go through automatically injecting those drivers in at the moment the machine is installed, it doesn't really provide me much utility, or it doesn't really speed up the amount of time it takes to deploy an operating system. Thankfully, WDS has this little drivers node over here where I can go through creating a driver database that will be automatically injected onto a machine when it comes time to deploy that OS image. I'm going to show you just a folder here that is not in this machine, but is instead on the host machine. So I'm, again, breaking the fourth wall here, and I'm showing you my host desktop. And if I come down here under Program Files x86 and take a look at the VMware folder, and then under VMware Workstation, you can see down here there is this windows.iso file right there. If I open up that windows.iso file, it will open up and show me something that looks similar to this. This is the VMware Tools location. And inside that VMware Tools location, if I go into Program Files, VMware, VMware Tools, and Drivers, I'll actually find a SCSI driver in here that is part of the installation of the VMware Tools. If you have ever gone through that driver's location and attempted to unpack the driver files all the way down into their most basic constituents, you will find a series of drivers that look very similar to this. Some cat files, some INF files, some sys files, and a txtsetup.oem file most generally. You may have different combinations of them, but more often than not, if you unpack far enough, you'll eventually get to this point. In that driver share, you may want to go about unpacking all of the drivers that exist in that driver share and just leaving them in their correct location, because WDS has the abilities to inventory a single share and all the subfolders of that share to suck in every single driver into its database at once. Let me show you how this process works. I'm going to go back and eliminate the fourth wall here, and then inside this virtual machine, show you the IT file share that I've created here in our demo environment. Here in this location, I've taken the drivers, those SCSI drivers, and unpacked them just like you saw a second ago. Let's assume that in addition to these VMware Workstation drivers, I had a whole list of drivers for all the different components that are on all the different machines in my environment. Well, I can here in this drivers node, if I right-click and choose to add a driver package, I can actually either select the driver packages from a specific file or all the driver packages from a folder and every subfolder to that location. This is really awesome. Let me choose the Browse button here and show you how this works. If I come here to this PC and the E drive and then the IT share and drivers, this will actually inventory the entire location. And when it does, give me a list of all the drivers that it locates. Once it identifies them, I can choose which ones I want to import here into WDS's driver database. And then clicking the next button here, actually get these imported in so that when a machine gets an OS deployed to it, the correct drivers will be automatically installed. When I import in these drivers, I have the abilities to import them in either not into a driver group or into a specific driver group. I can create one here called VMware Workstation, for example. So I can just consolidate them down into essentially a subfolder. And if I choose the next again and then finish, that will allow me to go about actually importing in these drivers into this driver group. Now you may be asking yourself, all right, Greg, well, you're creating this database of drivers. How do they actually get installed? And how do you know which drivers go in the appropriate location? Well, the Microsoft Windows operating system has this little feature called plug and play that I assume you've seen before. Anytime you plug in a digital camera or a USB hard drive into a machine, plug and play is what identifies what that device is and then installs the appropriate driver in order to be able to connect with it. Well, it's plug and play that you can use for really installing any kind of driver, whether it be a SCSI driver or a video driver or a sound driver, if the driver's been unpacked appropriately and made available here in the driver database here in WDS. By simply importing these drivers into the database, every single driver now in the database will be matched against the client receiving an operating system deployment, and any of those that correspond with that piece of hardware will have that driver automatically installed. Now, in a perfect world, every single driver will be deployed perfectly every time, but as you may have seen in your own experience, plug and play sometimes sort of screws up which driver goes in which place. Well, thankfully here in WDS, there's the abilities to define more filters, just like what we saw before down here, that can tailor out which drivers should go to with which deployments. These filters here, if I click the Add button, can allow you to, if you can figure out the manufacturer and the model and the BIOS vendor information off of a candidate piece of hardware, you can use this to identify that this package of drivers should be associated with that manufacturer or BIOS version or so on. All this information tends to be found in the WMI store of a machine, so you'll need to grab a sample computer to grab this information from. And I don't want to go into the gory details of how to extract this information because it's a little bit different for each filter type. But you can find this information out online. Let me pull up here a little web page that you'd find on Microsoft.com called Driver Group Filters. And although this applies to Windows Server 2008 R2, you can probably safely assume this will apply to some of the later versions as well. If I scroll down here, I just want to show you that for the client hardware filters, notice manufacturer, BIOS vendor, version, chassis type, and UUID. Over here is the location and information about how you would extract this information from a candidate piece of hardware. So start run msinfo32.exe, and then the value is under system manufacturer. Each one of these is a little bit different, so I'll leave this to you to figure out which ones you may need. As an end result, you will commonly find people that will take the different drivers for a particular manufacturer or a particular chassis type and then consolidate them down into a specific driver group. Then add a filter associated with that driver group to ensure that WDS deploys out the correct ones anytime you go through an OS installation. So backing away from the exam content for just a second and talking about field experience, I would steer clear of creating too many driver groups and filters until you find yourself in the situation where you find that driver mismatch occurring when you're going out deploying machines through WDS. It's always best to start with just a flat package structure and only encode those additional limitations when you have specific use cases that require them.